All right, welcome back, everybody. Hope you were able to get some food or something to drink, and you're ready to go for our next session. Before we get going here, I'm just going to quickly reintroduce myself for anybody who wasn't on earlier. So I'm Frank Lesniak. I'm a senior architect at West Monroe Partners. I won't spend too much time talking about myself. Tom, would you mind going to the bio slide here real quick? That just shows my Twitter handle in case anybody wants to contact me. Got my email up there, etc. And let me introduce my colleague Tom Gould, who's sitting right next to me. Tom, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. Hi guys. I'm Tom Gould. I'm a senior consultant here at West Monroe. I've been spending a good amount of my tenure here doing some Office 365 deployments and mobile device management work with this guy right here next to me. Keeps me pretty busy.
Lucky him.
Lucky him. Yeah. Lucky me. Been doing it for about 10 years now. I got a pretty good claim to fame that I did back in the day get an Office 365 beta tenant as soon as it was first released. So for a company that really didn't exist, I thought I needed one. So that's pretty much about me. Spent a lot of time here at West Monroe. Been here coming up on 5 years. Man, time really flies. Mm-hmm. So I guess let's just go ahead and kick this off and start talking about it.
All right.
So securing mobility. I know Johan and Amy spent a good amount of time here a little while ago talking about, the choose your own device or bring your own device, and I really want to get into some of the dilemmas that either you or some of the organizations might come across, because let's be honest, with this mobility first mentality, one day if you don't have a MDM solution or some kind of mobile employee security policy, your boss is going to walk in and drop that hammer on you pretty quick. So let's talk about how to secure your users. So first I want to talk first and foremost about this term called enterprise mobility management. Enterprise mobility management is really the glue that secures your mobile workforce. So we're going to talk about mobile device management, mobile application management. I'm going to touch briefly on information management. Not really sure that that's too pertinent for this conversation, but I think it's something that you'll get a good read on. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Let's see, how do I do that here?
Good call.
Is that better?
Huh. All right, sorry, folks. We'll get this straightened out.
I never made a claim to fame to be an audio-video guy, just throwing that out there.
There we go. All right,
there we go.
Much better.
Look at that. So back to the story. First, let's talk about what I expect to cover today and what your walkaways are going to be here. So first and foremost, I want to talk about what mobile device management is, if you're not very familiar with that term. Why companies are using it, what the top vendors are, the real implementation missed opportunities and pitfalls. I think that's going to be a good topic for the people out there. Device management versus application management. What's one or the other? Which one's going to work best for you? The capabilities, limitations. I'm going to hit on some of our past project experience and what our real experiences are and what our clients are actually doing. I'm going to briefly touch on some of the ConfigMgr integrations with co-management, when you should leverage one or the other, and not necessarily go too technical into how to integrate and reasonings. Application and software deployments, like I said, this is really going to hit on some of the ConfigMgr stuff, and then talk about why I'm here today. I feel I've got a couple of really good case studies that I really think I should share that may help you guys in the future if you end up having to deploy some of this stuff. But before we go a little bit further here, I want to lay some foundation here. I'm really expecting that most of your organizations are going to be pretty similar. You're going to have either a hosted or on-premises email solution, more than likely Exchange. That no matter what MDM solution you're going to have, there's going to be some synchronization tool that's sending back and forth information from your on-premises Active Directory. But leads me to my last point. I'm going to assume that you're running some Active Directory service on premises. So skipping in here into MDM, let's talk about why you should care and what can happen from my phone. Really want to throw an image credit out there to the person I pulled this from their mobile device management slide, because this really truly is a good representation of your users. If you don't know what your users are doing for mobile devices or with their mobile devices, you really might want to put an MDM solution out there. MDM prevents users from accessing their corporate data or bringing devices onto the corporate network without first you as an administrator making sure that you've got a good, secure foundation that you know that your data is protected whenever it's on a mobile device. So as users bring their mobile devices, as that bring your own device mentality, especially with the enablement of mobile workforce and salesmen and so on, and the use of iPads or Android tablets out in the wild, first the user is going to want to enroll their device, and that gives you clear visibility into what kind of usage is out there, what kind of apps are out there, what policies and what kind of device encryption and security the users already have on their phone. And if they don't have any, now that they're enrolled in your environment, you can push security policies to make sure that those devices are pretty secure and meet what you want them to meet if they're going to have corporate data on their device. And the last two pieces here, once they've enrolled and secured, you as an administrator can manage and also support that device. So hitting a little bit on mobile application management, which I'll speak to later, and then also support from you being able to push new certificates if you're pushing Wi-Fi profiles, or if you're really trying to enable your workforce so that they don't have to do as much with their device.
Tom, I just wanted to ask, I think there's probably a lot of people in the audience that are on Microsoft Exchange or Exchange Online, and they're probably familiar with Exchange ActiveSync policies. And we all know that Exchange ActiveSync can be used to enforce device encryption, PINs, some of the very rudimentary security features. So people in the audience might be wondering, isn't that enough? Why do I really need MDM?
Man, you're good at reading my slides before they even come up.
Imagine that.
Exchange offers ActiveSync, basic ActiveSync policies. You're probably familiar with this because most companies probably do have this. Your real limitation here is that I've got a good screenshot up here, or a good representation here of what an ActiveSync profile looks like, and you can see the good limitations here. You're only going to be able to push a passcode and force device encryption, and you're limited on the wipe options too. If you lose your phone, Frank, and I want to protect my corporate data, sorry, I'm going to have to wipe all your kids' pictures and stuff off your phone, so that's a real bummer.
That would be a bummer.
But the real option here, switching back to this slide, is with ActiveSync, you're missing that real management, monitoring, and support. Which, this is a pretty good graphic here. So took this from a screenshot from one of my recent last deployments to show once you get a device enrolled, you've got a pretty good holistic view of what your mobile device organization looks like. And they were actually a really good organization because I had to force a non-compliant device in there by removing a passcode on one of the devices. So I've talked a little bit about mobile device management, but that really is only focusing on the device. And it doesn't matter if you have an iPhone or an Android or even a Windows phone for that matter, but mobile devices can be secured and encrypted from the device, but also at the application level, which, like I said earlier, you can't do with Exchange ActiveSync. So real reason to push out an application management policy, which leads me into kind of the next section, the next piece of my puzzle when we're creating this enterprise mobility management suite is that mobile application management is the addition to MDM so that you can secure the devices at the device and also the application and the data that sits inside that application. So let's jump in here into mobile application management and really focus on the difference between the two and what the functionality is here. So with mobile application management, now instead of encrypting just the device, you're encrypting an application inside of the phone there. So, thinking about email, you can containerize that and really lock in and force users to only use an Outlook app on their device if they want to access corporate email.
But Tom, I mean, I know mobile application management is about configuring a list of applications you want to push down to those machines, but it's also about encrypting the data within those applications. In other words, doing what's called containerizations. Can you maybe talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, man, you're impressing me more and more with this. Reading my slide deck.
I'm on a roll today. We'll see how I do.
You're getting good at this.
All right.
So let's see some MAM in action. MAM really is, as Frank pointed out, the containerization process of sandboxing your corporate applications and also sandboxing the data that you're pushing out. So when we're talking about no MDM and no MAM, and referring back to the ActiveSync scenario, really users downloading applications to their phone, OneDrive, Word, Excel, and then accessing their email, downloading any attachment they could possibly think of, saving it to their personal OneDrive, sharing it from their Gmail account, really, bringing that chainsaw into the surgery room. What we want to lock down. So speaking directly to MAM now, we can lock them into those applications. So from an email perspective, we can say, hey, you can only use Outlook on your device to access your email. And then we can lock it down even farther and say, I don't want you to download attachments, or if you send me a Word document, I can edit that document only in Word, and they can only transfer back and forth between each other. And then you add mobile device management on top of that, and now you're making sure that users have encryption on their device, they've got passcodes on their device, and also the corporate data isn't leaving those applications that you designated as safe places for the users.
We all like safe places.
Yeah, we definitely all like safe places. So the way we set that up is with conditional access policies. We say you can only access this environment if this is true and this is true. Once you pass all those checks, then you're good.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Actually, one point, Tom. I think it's a great point because a lot of people, a lot of organizations have some kind of policy in place that says, hey, I can only put data on a device that's under management. And that's all well and good. It's pretty common. Obviously, you've talked about how we can, get a device under management. But can you maybe talk a little bit more about, from a practical perspective, why that might be important?
Yeah, that's a...
Why might it be important to have a device under management? If I'm doing application management already, the application is encrypted, it's containerized. Why do I care about the device it sits on?
Yeah, perfect. So really the whole purpose here is to make sure that the devices themselves are secured, and then not only that, but your users aren't finding ways to circumvent or find ways around your security policy. So we can add mobile device management on top of mobile application management to prevent devices from being jailbroken or rooted, because we definitely don't want that user on their old Nexus 1 probably running some flavor of Kit Kat. We really don't want to push any kind of security vulnerabilities out through legacy operating systems or old devices.
Right, so that's just it, right? We're relying on these mobile applications to be encrypted and secured. If the device underneath them is not secured, and then it sort of defeats the purpose, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then last but not least, you also, with mobile application management and mobile device management, you're really enabling the administrators and the IT department to have good control over those devices. So if someone was to leave on bad terms or be removed from the company or leave on good terms, you can remove that corporate data from their device without wiping their entire device. That really upset a lot of people. So I think it's best now that we talk about the tools that we've had some experience with and speak more to what our experiences have been. So when we're talking about all these vendors, there are quite a bit of vendors out there, which I'll talk about here in a minute, because you can see the amount of providers that are out in the wild that are providing some flavor of mobile device management. But no matter which way you choose, the most important thing here is to, I like this term, rules before tools. What I'm speaking to here is you really should have a paper document that is defining what your mobile device usage policy is and how you're going to roll this out. And I'll talk about that a little bit in the pitfalls section of this presentation of the slide, but if you don't have a good foundation to start from, you're going to have a really poor deployment, and you're also going to have a really, really poor user experience.
Yeah, I think, if IT is what's defining these policies, the project could fail, right? I mean, if you think about an IT administrator going in and locking down a device, that may upset people if it's their personal device. And if that locking down of the device isn't driven by a corporate policy that Tom mentioned, like a documented policy, the IT administrator probably doesn't have a lot of teeth in what he or she is doing, and therefore, could get themselves in some hot water with the executives that they're upsetting.
Yeah, that's a great point, especially if you do have that paper document or that actual corporate policy that's been approved and had some good amount of eyes on it and got a corporate stamp of approval, and someone comes to push back, then you've got a good firm ground to stand on and make sure that this is the policy, this is what we agreed on, we can't change this now.
Yep, we just want to make sure you don't get fired. That's really what it comes down to.
We don't want that. As I talked about, there are a lot of vendors out in this marketplace. We here at West Monroe have been seeing a good push for the Intune suite. It's Microsoft's proprietary integration with Office 365. So whenever I talk back in the foundation, I'm assuming that you have some sort of Active Directory or on-premises solution. Especially since this is a ConfigMgr meetup, I would hope that you have Active Directory.
It's probably a reasonable assumption.
I think it's a reasonable assumption too. So when we're talking about that, if you already have Office 365 or change on-prem, you might have an Azure footprint. The good assumption here is that you're going to have Azure Active Directory Connect already. So you really already have a good foundation for Intune, and that's why we're seeing some of our customers move directly to Intune, and the widespread use of Microsoft when you have an EA or some kind of software licensing agreement, you're going to get some pretty good discounts, especially if you have a good amount of users in your organization and are at a pretty large scale. And then also Intune has a pretty good integration with Azure AD and their threat protection, so not only are you deploying mobile device management, application management, but you're also limiting the ecosystem and footprint that you have integrated into your current environment. So I've got this Gartner chart up here talking about, and you can see the number of solutions out here, but in the past 2 or 3 years, we've really seen the push for mobile workforce, whether it's removing laptops from salesmen and giving them iPads, or talking about hospitals and removing some of those workstations that they've got laptops and giving them Surfaces or iPads or iPhones or whatever else. So, this Gartner from 2015 and 2017 puts a real good perspective on how the mobile device management platform has matured just over 2 years. And there's even a lot of solutions on here that I've never even heard of.
Yeah, and also a lot of folks that dropped off from 2015 to 2017. I was surprised to see SAP on the list when I looked at this, for example.
I'm still surprised to see BlackBerry pretty high up there in the leaders for 2017. Be curious to see where that goes next year.
Hey, good for them.
So I talked a little bit, about that shift of how the leaders in the mobile device management have changed, and Microsoft has made a pretty big leap going from where they were all the way up to where they are now, and they've had some pretty significant year-over-year growth. So I think they're making pretty good leaps and bounds to be in the marketplace with their competitors like AirWatch or Mobile Iron.
Tom mentioned some licensing synergy, and I just wanted to point out that, and again, Tom already mentioned this, but I did want to point out that the enterprise mobility and security license, we often see that added to an Office 365 deployment. That does include Intune, as Tom's got on the screen here. And Intune also gets you ConfigMgr, by the way. So this is a convenient way for smaller organizations that maybe don't have an enterprise agreement to get access to ConfigMgr, if that's something you'd like to do. And I also wanted to point out that even though it's not very exciting, the Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite also includes a Windows Server CAL for your users. So, if you were looking at licensing compliance, this is a good way to make sure that you are compliant. This is not a licensing talk, but I will say that when West Monroe does licensing assessments, we often find that Windows Server CALs are the number one way that people are not compliant.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, we all know that CALs aren't the sexiest part of an infrastructure or licensing agreement, but it's a good point that you get some of those free ones along with ConfigMgr. Not only do you get the licensing with the CALs and ConfigMgr, but the Enterprise Mobility Suite, when integrated with your Office 365 licensing or even just your regular EA, you're getting a real full bundle of licenses for a really cheap cost. The E3 license, sorry for you Europe users or international users, but my slides are in USD. So,
America.
For less than $9, you're getting $22 worth of licensing if you were to purchase them individually, and then respectively, if you were to go up to the E5 for $15, you're getting $35 worth of licensing. So it's pretty good margins on there. So I've talked a good amount about Intune and our experience with that. It's mostly, I'm talking to that because it's what I've seen more and more recently, especially with my personal Office 365 work and just the field that West Monroe works in. So not to sway you to the Intune side, but really to try and stay, industry separate here. Intune and Microsoft is pretty awesome with their marketing fluff. So, you can protect your data at every turn or support diverse mobile ecosystems, but taking away from the marketing fluff, what our actual experience looks like. If you remember that slide that I put up about, they had the picture of the mobile devices that showed no MDM and MAM and no mobile device management without MAM and MAM and mobile device management. My experience that I've come to find out is that delineation of corporate data and personal data, yes, it is 100% there, but it's really only a one-way path. So you're securing all of your corporate data and allowing it to stay inside of its containerized platform, but you're not preventing personal data from entering into that corporate ecosystem. Just forewarning that if you do have that in place, once your user moves some of their personal information into that containerized area, they won't be able to get it back out.
So, Amy, if you move your dog photos into that corporate container, you're not getting those dog photos back out. Oh, Amy doesn't like cat photos. Well, we're fighting. Anyway.
So yeah, that's one of our experiences, and then not quite sure how to explain one of our next experiences, but Windows phones really don't work well with Intune, especially Windows Phone 8.1. I'm glad that that's kind of gone out of the ecosystem, and I'm not seeing that much anymore. But Windows 10 Mobile worked okay. It just was the delineation between trying to push laptop profiles or actual full-blown Windows 10 policies to a mobile device made it a little confusing and pretty cumbersome to create those and then have a delineation if you were pushing Windows 10 profiles out to segregate those out from your actual mobile devices. And then last but not least, this one actually came up to bite us a little bit, was when you're pushing Outlook profiles or you're containerizing your applications, you're really isolating that user to only using one corporate identity on that device.
Tom, can you maybe explain that a little bit? Like, why would somebody want to use more than one corporate identity on a device?
Sure, and I'm not condoning this by any means, but some organizations out there, you might have shared credentials for a shared mailbox rather than doing an appropriate permissioning and pushing it automatically. In those situations where you might want to have an Outlook profile on your mobile device for your personal, but let's say you have 4 or 5 people who all monitor a shared mailbox together. If you try and sign into an Outlook application if you're using MAM, it's not going to know which Intune security profile to pull from. So you're going to error out and get a pretty generic error message when you're trying to sign in with 2 corporate identities into one Outlook profile account. And the same thing is true for OneDrive and also with OneNote or any of those other applications you might be using. So, a little while ago I talked about, does it matter if you have an Android or an Apple device? When we're talking about this whole ecosystem, no, it really doesn't matter, but sorry Android users, which happens to be me and Frank, they really don't play nice with mobile device management systems as well as an Apple device. And inherently that's just because of the way that Apple devices work and with their security and certificate profiles. You're granting you as an administrator true administrative controls over the device, and then you're allowing the user to do what you want them to do. But whereas with an Android device, you have to look at it as like a typical Windows PC, and you're giving users local admin to the PC, but you as an administrator also have local admin, and there's this like delegation of roles that you have to monitor and account for.
So the user can make a change, but MDM will sort of catch that a change was made. Yeah. Basically.
Yeah, exactly. And then if you do something that the MDM provider doesn't like, then you're pretty much going to call the police on yourself and send all sorts of flags and alarms into the MDM solution, and your administrator is going to have to make a decision on what you want to do with that device. So transitioning along here a little bit farther, I really think there are a few points that I want everybody to have a takeaway here. What did I do wrong? What were the mistakes I made? What were the missed opportunities? What are the pitfalls? So, these are what I've seen our clients do. This is what I've done. This is what I've seen other people do. So take this slide away if you're going to take anything here, because you're going to have to deploy an MDM solution if you don't already have one. So don't overcomplicate your deployments. There's no clear definition or understanding. This is what I was talking about earlier. You need to have that piece of paper that's telling you where to go, what to do. And don't impose impractical controls. You really don't need a 12-character alphanumeric passcode on your phone. And then moving into like a half-hearted deployment. This is typically going to be, you might have purchased a Cadillac when you need a bicycle, and you've got all these controls and configurations and the ability to do anything you want, but at the end of the day, all you really need to do is push an email profile and just make sure it was encrypted. I mean, that might even be the case that you don't even need an MDM solution at all, and ActiveSync would have worked just fine. Moving on to the next point now, like not taking advantage of product and cost synergy. So, if you're using like an Okta or AirWatch or something else for more than just MDM solution, it might not make sense for you to get Intune when you're already leveraging another third party to do something else. I pointed out, especially on this one, MFA as an add-on feature. Some of these other providers might require you to have an ADFS implementation if you want to use MFA. But if you were to use like Intune, you already have that ecosystem set up that you can set up MFA profiles. And one thing I just recently learned that I thought was pretty cool, and I'll show you guys later in this demo, is I just found out that you can now do geofencing with MFA. So I'm actually in the process of deploying that out now. So pretty much for our client that I'm looking at now, if you're not in the United States, no matter what device you're on, you're always going to get an MFA prompt.
Well, and on this point, Tom, circling back a little bit, before you mentioned MFA, I think another thing we see a lot is that clients have this enterprise mobility plus security license, maybe because they need Azure Active Directory Premium, or because they want to do the CAL compliance thing I mentioned earlier. And maybe they're on another MDM provider like AirWatch. And one of the first things Tom said is a lot of these providers technically are pretty similar. So why not? I mean, AirWatch is a great product, don't get me wrong, but if you have this Intune license, why not, not renew AirWatch and migrate to Intune and just kind of reclaim that licensing cost? That's my opinion. Yeah,
completely agree. Good point. And then last but not least is imposing overbearing controls on personal devices. At the end of the day, these aren't corporate devices, so monitoring things like GPS or web traffic or doing any kind of like application filtering or application monitoring is really just, an overuse of power. You really don't need to have that on that mobile device.
Most likely anyway.
Most likely anyways. There probably are some extenuating circumstances where that might be true. But getting down to the nitty-gritty last point of this is just, imposing overbearing controls really comes back to not focusing on the protection of the data and instead focusing on the protection of the asset you don't own. So, some of our other points that I want to make here, is the initial configuration and setup in Intune, and not only Intune, but this is true for any MDM provider, can be troublesome and less intuitive So do your research whenever you're creating the rules for the tools to make sure that you have the right information you need to drive all of this, because without knowing your governance policies or your security policies or what you have in place, you really don't know where you're going. And then to have single sign-on with Intune, you must configure Azure AD. So this is another thing that I'm pretty sure that people might not think about, but if you're going to use single sign-on, especially on a Windows 10 device or even just a Windows Mobile, and you want to pass through authentication, you have to have your Azure AD set up and configured for that. And then I'll hit this one too, the application proxy with the Intune portal. Yeah, they do have that ability. I know that some of the other tools out there like Good4Works or Mobile Iron can push intranet sites out to your mobile devices, but I want to just reiterate that Intune can do that as well, but it's a little less intuitive, pretty cumbersome, and difficult to set up, and actually we found out to be pretty buggy. So not sure that I would completely recommend that if you're heavily requiring intranet access from your mobile devices, without a VPN at least, that is. So I really want to throw some statistics out here. So I've talked about these rules for the tools and creating the governance policies and setting everything up that you need from the point and perspective of your boss came in and asked you to deploy this, and then a week later you come back and you give your sales pitch to him on what you're going to do and what you're going to deploy and what tools you're going to use, and you've got your whole business case and justification set up for him. But some really interesting statistics that I found actually from a Gartner report a couple of weeks ago was that most organizations don't have one enterprise mobility solution deployed. They just couldn't find a single solution to meet all the requirements, which could be driven because they didn't do their requirements gathering in the first place. So they've got multiple solutions that's already deployed. So and that falls into about 80% of the Magic Quadrant and critical capabilities reference stated that they were running more than 2 enterprise mobility platforms for mobile device management. And then to go a little further, 28% of the people that were interviewed by Gartner said they were using 3 or more MDM solutions. And then, as the mobile first user is becoming more adopted across the enterprise, most organizations are only using about 10% of the enterprise mobility management functionality. So, going back to the rules for the tools and doing your research and finding and choosing a mobile device management platform, like I said earlier, you're going to end up paying for a Cadillac if you really only need a bicycle.
So, Tom, you're saying that 30 to 40% of functionality is used in advanced deployments. That seems like a huge gap. What would you say is that remaining 60 to 70% of functionality?
I don't know what I'm going to do if you keep guessing the slides before I put them up here. The mobile information management side of this piece is the real ecosystem that makes up that last bit of the huge amounts of the enterprise mobility management platform here. This is taking it a step further. So we've talked about encrypting the device and putting compliance policies on the device. Then we talked about applications and the process of containerizing those applications, creating security policies and sharing policies inside those applications. Now let's take it even a step further and say, we've got all this information that's being stored in those applications. I want to be able to control those actual documents at the document level and prevent printing or prevent sharing or really lock that down even further. So I'm starting to get down into like some digital rights management and information rights management. So these 3 pieces create what I consider to be the glue for enterprise mobility management. But I really don't want to get into this because I can go on for days about that one, but because that's about all there is to know. So for now. So moving on a little bit aside from the actual mobile devices, one of the things that I've been asked about recently is how about Windows 10? I know Intune is supported on Windows 10. I know that I can have some delegation of rights from my ConfigMgr deployment. So how does co-management fit into this ecosystem? So, if you've got Windows 10 out in your ecosystem and you're really wanting to leverage some of the ConfigMgr possibilities that that hybrid migration is allowed, this is kind of the section you're going to want to listen to here. So, if you're running on legacy versions of Windows 10 or anything older than Windows 10, 7, 8, 1, you're really not going to get anything out of this because the Intune support for anything prior to Windows 10 is pretty legacy. But Intune allows for Windows 10 modern management capabilities to allow that lighter touch, which I know Amy talked about earlier, from the Windows Autopilot and deploying applications and setting up some security controls on Windows 10 using Intune. So, rules before the tools, I'll keep saying that all day. If you're going to look to use Intune for your Windows 10 devices, it's pretty important here that you understand that Intune probably can't replace everything you're doing today. Intune isn't meant for imaging. Group policies are going to have to be transitioned over to compliance policies. And if you're like any of the organizations I've seen, or even some of the companies I've worked for, you have an abundance of group policies that probably are outdated and shouldn't even be there. So this could be a good opportunity to clean up some of your group policies if you're looking to move to the Security and Compliance Center. It doesn't support hygiene very well on the Windows 10 devices if you're using mail or anything like that. I've been asked that question from a couple of people and some other clients. And then now recently, if you're running anything prior to ConfigMgr 1802, Intune couldn't do any kind of endpoint protection. But more recently, this is capability. Actually, I had to add available in 1802 just recently because I put this deck together before 1802 when it actually wasn't a capability. So, and then last but not least, if you're doing any kind of complex workloads or app deployments, especially in your imaging process or your task sequences, Intune really can't help you at all.
Tom, you mentioned imaging, group policies, and a few other things that you can't really do well with Intune today. Can you use some of these things with using co-management or some sort of hybrid setup?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So Microsoft pretty much says that the hybrid isn't supported. It's meant for truly migrating and offloading your roles and responsibilities from ConfigMgr up to Intune. And then once you're there, you don't use that hybrid anymore, and you start actually delegating the roles and using Intune for what it really can do. So talking about like the co-management of the actual devices. So doing Windows operating system patching and really making ConfigMgr and Intune work together, but not necessarily leveraging one tool from the other. And then actually, thanks for this call out. Frank here sent me this picture last night. He saw on a tweet. So this was added to the deck last night about 1 o'clock in the morning. This is...
That's when we get the real work done, by the way, 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, real work happens after midnight.
That's right.
That's how you know you're cool, when you're working in IT. This slide is almost exactly accurate for whenever you want to use Intune in the co-management situation, right? You're going to want to Azure AD join those PCs, and then from there you can register, you can push policies, you can now with 1802 encrypt the devices, push OS deployments, create security and compliance policies, especially whenever we're talking about whenever I feel it's actually a little more appropriate. So,
Tom, go back for 1 second. Is it fair to say that you'd want to configure these compliance policies for the scenario where the Windows 10 device might be a bring your own device, meaning whether that device is corporate owned or a personal device, it gets joined to Azure AD, the same set of compliance policies get applied. So is that how you would sort of scope those out?
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly how I would scope these out. Really talking about what Johan and Amy mentioned earlier. It's the not necessarily a bring your own device, but a choose your own device. So if you're going to have users bring their own Windows laptops, so maybe this might be a contractor or some other user, you could get them to Azure AD join their device or Azure AD register their device, and now you've got the ability to do remote wiping of that corporate data that some third-party person might have on there. or you know, you want to make sure that if someone's going to bring their own device or choose their own device, that it's going to be fully patched so that you're not bringing vulnerabilities onto your network. You know, but I hit this a little bit kind of from both sides now. I talked about you know, the Windows Update side of things. Yeah, Windows Update is great for the bring your own device, but if you've already got ConfigMgr or System Center pushing out updates, I don't think Windows would do a better job on Intune. So, yeah, pretty much it. And then, like I said earlier, if you're doing some complex task sequences or deploying some pretty custom applications, especially if you're working in a business that have your own applications, you know, like a real estate company, and you've got your own MLS software or whatever it might be, really you should probably stick with your ConfigMgr to deploy those applications, because Intune won't handle them very well. And then if you've got some really complex group policies, moving those to security policies in Intune is probably not a good idea.
Assuming those need to stick around.
Assuming those need to stick around. So that's pretty much all I got here from the slides. So let's move over to the demo. Amy took a little of my thunder earlier walking through some of the Intune blades, but that's okay, I'll accept it this time. So I talked about laying the foundation for any...
Oh, we lost video. Just a second, everybody.
Video. Told you I wasn't an AV guy.
Disconnect, reconnect. There we go.
Success.
All right. Just got to drag it over. Oh, you're going to duplicate?
I'm just going to duplicate here. Might work better that way.
Okay. There we go.
So, talking about Intune, you know, I talked about setting the foundation with that conditional access. So, first place we're going to want to start here is if you open your Active Directory blade and go down into your conditional access, you can see that I've got this. I created an email only policy. So this policy here, I'm setting up that, hey, I don't want any of my users to access email from ActiveSync or from a native mail app, because I don't trust it. I'm pretty skeptical of what users are going to do. So I want to make sure I know what they're doing. So as you can see here, I've got this applied to Exchange Online. I've got two conditions here. I've got one set up, so all my iOS and Android devices. I've got all my Android devices and iOS devices here set up. So you can see that these conditions are now applying to Exchange Online and to iOS and Android devices. So once I go down in here into the client apps, now I've got these set up so that they're configured to mobile apps and desktop clients, and also mobile browsers. And then once I have that set up in here, I'm going to want to grant access for the users that are a member of this policy, and then require the device to be marked as compliant. And I've also got this little checkbox in here. So this little checkbox here is just saying exactly what it means. I don't want them to use anything that is not a Microsoft approved app. So if we click on in here and click it, we can see exactly which applications we're talking about here. So
these are really apps that are aware of containerization.
Yeah, these are Microsoft approved apps that are aware of containerization. So since we're talking about email here, Microsoft Outlook's the only thing that's going to apply.
I wonder what Kaizala is. I've never seen that. I'll have to look at that one later.
I don't know. We might have to do some Google foo here in a little bit. So now that we've got that set up, if you remember here, I set this policy to require the device to be compliant. So once I go in here, I'm going to click the Intune blade and start creating some of these device compliance policies. These device compliance policies actually don't have any created, so let's go ahead and create one here. As we said, we got to create a name.
Be compliant. I like it.
Don't necessarily need a description. That's pretty optional here. So let's go ahead and start with iOS, because as I said earlier, they tend to play a little nicer with.
Can you click that drop down, Tom, and then zoom it in just so everybody can see that? I think that's pretty important. Yeah, so.
Yeah, so see, you can start deploying these security policies to Android, iOS, and then this would be obviously where you're going to create those Windows 10 profiles if you're going to move some of those compliance policies from group policy.
I think the key thing here is that it's a unique policy per platform, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because the settings are different.
Yeah, exactly. And then from an email, we can say that the device has to have a managed email profile, so it means that the users can't add the mail profile themselves. We're going to have to create it for them. Or we can go in here and device health, device properties, and security settings. So I'm going to go in here into the security settings first, because this is, if you remember back to my active sync policy, this would be the only settings you're going to be able to configure if you were looking at just active sync. So let's assume we created our device compliance policy and all of our devices are in good shape and we have a compliance policy. So switching down over into what I consider, or what is the MAM piece of this. So here's where we would set up an additional conditional access policy for Exchange Online, and now we're truly going to actually restrict the email profile straight on into the phone. But actually, this moved back to where I set it up the first place. I keep doing that. I'm not ahead of this.
We discovered this. We discovered this yesterday.
Yeah, I did this actually last week, and it wasn't the case. So still getting the hang of the new updates. So as was mentioned earlier, you might want to go check out those weekly updates of what Intune's doing, because they're making a lot of changes and strides. So first, the first thing we need to do here is go back here, and we would want to create an app policy. So I created this Outlook policy already here. So we can go in here, we can see who it's assigned to. So let's go in here into General, create a name, as I already did. We're going to target to all the apps. We're going to assign it to the users, and then targeted apps here. So as I mentioned earlier in that compliance policy, we're going to require the device to be compliant, and we want it to know where the mail is going to go. So now we're only going to be allowed to add mail profiles to this Outlook account. And then, I know I talked a lot about the application side of things. So you can deploy policies and you can deploy apps, but the real feature here is that containerization side of things. So containerizing stuff inside of Outlook. So really don't have too much else here. The further you dig down inside this into an application policy, you can really do some customized things. So with the app configuration, you can push some custom settings inside the Outlook app, or if you're deploying an Intune managed browser, you can push favorites or push custom configurations to the browser. This would come into play, as I was talking about earlier, that this gets pretty complex with the intranet zones and intranet sites, because you actually have to configure application configuration to push into the Microsoft proxies.
Indeed.
Perfect. Yeah, I love questions. So if you guys have any questions out there, you can hit me up on my Twitter feed at Thomas B. Gould. I'm not very popular, but I'm a little more popular than David from this morning.
Debatable. Just kidding. Yeah, so the audio feed is delayed about 30 seconds, so let's give people a chance to see if they want to submit some questions really quickly. Now would be the time to do that, and I will watch for them. I guess while we're waiting, I'm going to quickly plug an event for anybody that is local in DuPage. DuPage Human Race is a week from this upcoming Saturday. It's an early morning, fun, family-friendly, either a run or walk type race. It's pet-friendly, Amy and Johan. So, feel free to register. If you've got a well-behaved dog, for example, you can bring him to the race. Or if you're like me, I'm actually bringing my cat because I'm fun like that. Bringing the space cat with me to the race. So it's a good time. Come along, and when you register as a walker or a runner, you get to pick a nonprofit. And if you don't have a nonprofit in mind, I encourage you, if you're an animal person like me, to to sign up with DuPage Animal Friends. And what's nice about that is a portion of your race registration fees, a large portion of your race registration fees goes to the nonprofit that you select. So it's really a cool event. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions yet, so I'm going to assume that means we don't have any. All right, okay.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. I hope you took something away, and hope you have a successful MDM deployment.
All right. Thanks, everybody.